Hey there, everyone. Welcome to the second video lesson in our course Experimental Psychology. In the first video, we've talked about the importance of scientific psychology, thinking in terms of scientific psychology. We also looked into the four methods of fixating beliefs. We also looked into critical thinking and using the baloney detection kit in understanding or investigating theories. In this video, we are going to talk about the importance of ethics in psychological research. I want to start this lesson by defining research ethics. When we say research ethics, this refers to the correct rules of conduct necessary when carrying out research. We have we have the moral responsibility to protect research participants from harm. As you can see, um, there is a focus on the word rules in the context of ethics, as compared to guidelines, which are recommendations or rather best practices, which usually do not have punishment for non-compliance. Rules are formalized orders establishing ways of doing things that must be obeyed. So, research ethics are not guidelines. Research ethics are rules, and non-compliance to these rules can have implication in your practice of psychology and in your studies. Now, it's important when we think about ethics, it's important to think about the four principles of a moral life by Tom Beecham and Jim Childress. Now, according to these two American philosophers, there are four important principles in living a moral life, and they are as follow. Number one, the principle of autonomy acknowledges a person's right to make choices, to hold views, and to take actions based on personal values. Number two, the principle of justice means that we have to treat people equitably, and we have to distribute benefits as well as burdens fairly. Number three, non-maleficence, or sometimes they call this do no harm. It's our obligation not to inflict harm intentionally. In medical ethics, the physician's guiding maxim is actually first do no harm, and this reflects the third principle of a moral life. And number four, beneficence or do good, provide benefits to persons and contribute to their welfare. This refers to an action done for the benefit of others. Now, in practice, these ethical principles mean that as a researcher, you need to, number one, obtain informed consent from potential research participants. Number two, minimize the risk of harm to participants. Number three, protect their anonymity and confidentiality. Number four, avoid using deceptive practices. And number five, give participants the right to withdraw from your research. Now, this lesson will talk more about those research ethics as I have mentioned earlier. Now, this video lesson is based on the ethical principles of psychologists and code of conduct, section 8, which refers to which refers to research and publication. This is from the American Psychology Society Association. Now, the first ethical the first ethical no, not guidelines. The first ethics is when we conduct research, we always have to get the institution's approval. So when institutional approval is required, psychologists provide accurate information about their research proposals and obtain approval prior to conducting their research. They conduct their research in accordance with the approved research protocol. So, as in conducting thesis, ano, we, as in conducting thesis, dito sa experimental psychology na class, you are required before you conduct the research to provide accurate information about your research proposal, and you have to obtain approval from the institution. Now, sino ba ang agent ng institution in this context? In many ways, ako yung agent ng institution, being your professor in this subject. But there are cases where you will have to present your research work, or you will have to present your proposal not only to me but also to other members of the psychology department. Okay, we will talk more about that and your capstone requirement for this class as we move along or as we progress in this class. So, yung second principle is informed consent to research. Now, when obtaining informed consent as required in Standard 3.10, informed consent, psychologists or students inform their participants about the following. Number one, the purpose of the research, expected duration, and procedures. Hindi ito bargainable, ano? You have to tell them ano yung purpose ng research. You have to tell them gaano katagal mo ini-expect yung research mangyari, gaano katagal yung participation nila, at yung mga procedures na mag-undergo sila. It's hard to make informed decisions kung hindi mo alam yung nature noong research kung saan ikaw ay nire-recruit. Number two, you have to tell them that they have the right to decline to participate and to withdraw from the research once participation has begun. It doesn't mean that just because they said yes when you invited them, it means na hindi na sila pwedeng mag-say no or mag-withdraw sa participation during the actual experiment. So at any point of the research, pwede silang mag-withdraw. At any point of the research ay okay lang, ano? And wala dapat ma-incur na consequence doon sa participant yung kanilang pag-withdraw sa research. Next, yung foreseeable consequence of declining or withdrawing. Anong ibig natin sabihin dito? Ano yung foreseeable consequence sa iyo, hindi doon sa participant, doon sa research mo? Anong mangyayari? Ano yung posibleng mangyari sa research pag nag-decline sila? It doesn't mean na i-guilt trip mo sila into joining your research, but it means kailangan nila ma-inform kung ano yung magiging consequence ng action nila sa research mo pagka sila ay nag-withdraw. Okay. Also, kailangan nilang ma-inform tungkol sa reasonable, foreseeable factors that may expect to influence their willingness to participate, such as yung potential risk, such as yung discomfort, if they will be subjected to discomfort, and some adverse effect. Ano yung ina-expect mo, halimbawa, na maging side effect or adverse effect? Halimbawa, you are experimenting with the effects of caffeine in the body. Siguro, it's important that you tell them kung ano yung adverse or side effect ng caffeine sa ibang tao. Hindi po pwedeng sabihin mong walang side effect or walang adverse effect. It's important that your participants or your potential participants are cognizant of these things. Next, any research benefits, anong makukuha niya sa pag-participate? We're not talking about incentives, but rather, ano yung benefit ng research doon sa participant? Anong benefit ng research sa iyo as a researcher? At anong benefit ng research in general, sa general population? Anong mapapala ng tao or anong mapapala ng ating society, ng ating ng ibang tao sa research mo? Or also, kailangan mong i-inform yung participants ng limitations ng confidentiality. Hindi unlimited ang confidentiality, especially when people's lives are in danger, especially when someone is expressing suicidal ideations, and especially pagka may harm nang involved doon sa situation. Hindi unlimited ang confidentiality, and your potential participant should know about this, na hindi unlimited yung confidentiality nila. Also, kailangan mo silang inform if you choose to provide them with incentives. Okay? Kailangan alam nila kung ano yung posible nilang matanggap for joining your research. And lastly, at least dito sa part 1 ng informed consent, kailangan nilang malaman kung sinong pwedeng kontakin nila for questions about the research and yung rights nila bilang research participants. Kailangan you provide them with enough opportunity to have dialogues with you even before they express that they want to join your research. Okay, part 2 ng informed consent, where psychologists conducting intervention researches involving the use of experimental treatments clarify the participants about the following. First, the experimental nature of the treatment. Kailangan alam nila ano yung nature ng treatment na, ano yung experimental dun sa treatment na yon. Next, yung services that will or will not be available doon sa control group. Kailangan alam nila ito dun sa onset pa lang ng research. Kailangan alam nila bago sila mag-express na informed consent. Also, the means by which assignment to treatment or control groups will be made. Ano ba yung gagamitin mong method of randomly assigning participants into groups or into treatment? Kailangan alam nila kung ano yung chances nila na mapabilang sa control or sa experimental group. Also, kailangan alam nila yung available treatment alternatives. If an individual does not wish to participate in the research or wishes to withdraw once a study has begun, kailangan nila ano yung pwedeng alternative treatment na matanggap nila kung sakasakaling mag-withdraw sila pagka nagsimula na yung research. Okay? Meron ba silang matatanggap na compensation of participating, including, if appropriate, whether reimbursement from the participant or a third-party payer will be sought. So, kailangan inform sila dito ano yung financial context ng pagsali nila dun sa experiment or dun sa research mo. Okay, point 3 ng research ethics ay yung informed consent for recording voices and images in research. Now, hindi lang doon sa pagsali sa research humihingi ng informed consent, pati rin dito kung i-record mo yung kanilang boses or kukuha ka ng picture or magre-record ka ng video, kailangan din meron silang expressed consent. Okay, psychologists obtain informed consent from participants prior to recording their voices or images unless, syempre may ano yan, meron yang may exception siya. Unless, number 1, the research consists solely of naturalistic observation in public places, and it's not anticipated that the recording will be used in a manner that could cause personal identification or harm. In cases where you are conducting naturalistic observation in public places, it's no longer necessary for you to ask each of the person who's going to pass by dun sa iyong observation for their consent na nagre-record ka ng boses or ng pictures nila. Lalong-lalo na kung wala ka namang ina-anticipate na personal identification or harm dun sa mga tao na lalabas dun sa picture or dun sa video or dun sa voice recording. Pangalawa, pagka yung research design mo includes deception and consent for the use of recording is obtained during the briefing. There are cases where experimenters will opt to use deception, and in such cases, pwedeng ang paghingi ng consent doon sa voice recording or dun sa pictures na kinuha ay mangyari pagka nag-debrief ka na ng iyong participant ng experiment. Pero mahalaga ay kailangan magbigay pa rin sila ng consent pagka nag-debrief ka na sa kanila. Okay, yung fourth ethical principle is with regards to your client slash patient, students, and subordinate research participants. There are cases where as- where a particular professor might invite their students to participate in their research. As in the cases nung sa ginawa naming research ni Ms. Des, we invited you to participate in our research. Pero there are also cases where counselors or therapists might ask their clients or patients to participate in their research. Okay, when psychologists conduct research with clients slash patients, students, or subordinates as participants, they have to take necessary steps to protect the prospective participant from adverse consequences or of declining or withdrawing from participation. Kailangan bilang experimenter, bilang researcher, you will have to make necessary steps para maprotektahan kung yung potential participant or yung actual participant kung magwi-withdraw sila sa iyong research. Hindi po pwedeng merong consequence na pag hindi ka sumama dito sa research ko, ikaw ay babagsak sa klase or you will be marked as absent or I will no longer accept you as my client. Hindi po pwedeng ganun ang consequence ng hindi pagsali sa research. Also, when research participation is a course requirement or an opportunity for extra credit, the prospective participants is given the choice of equitable alternative activity. Kung halimbawa, course requirement yung pagsali sa research, kailangan yung professor should provide a choice of equitable alternative activity kung sakaling ayaw sumali ng estudyante sa kanyang research. Kailangan mag-provide pa rin yung professor ng activity na gagawin ng student na makakakuha ka pa rin siya ng equivalent grade, kahit na hindi siya sasali doon sa research. Walang pilitan pagdating sa research. Kahit na estudyante mo yung potential participant, kahit na client mo yung potential participant or pasyente mo yung potential participant, hindi mo pwedeng pilitin. Hindi mo pwedeng gamitan ng coercion ang iyong potential participant. Okay. However, there are cases where you can do without the informed consent. There are special cases lang. Psychologists may do away may do away with informed consent only when, number one, where research would not reasonably be assumed to create distress or harm and involves the following. So kailangan it will not create distress or harm at saka kasama siya dito. Number one, the study of normal educational practices, curricula, or classroom management methods conducted in educational setting. Kung halimbawa gusto mong matuklasan kung ano yung kung ano yung teaching method or classroom management method ng isang teacher at pag-o-observe ka halimbawa sa loob ng classroom, hindi kailangan na ng informed consent ng lahat ng mga students na nasa loob ng classroom. Okay? Kung halimbawa chine-check mo yung curriculum, hindi na rin kailangan ng informed consent ng iyong participants. Also, only anonymous questionnaires will be used. Naturalistic observations, or archival research for which disclosure of responses would not place participants at risk of criminal liability or civil liability or damage their financial standing, employability, reputation, and confidentiality is protected. Halimbawa, ikaw ay gagawa ng archival research kung saan titignan mo halimbawa yung responses ng ilang individuals in the past. Hindi na kailangan na balikan mo pa ang bawat individual sa iyong archival research para pagpaalam kung pwede silang gamitin or pwedeng gamitin yung kanilang documents bilang bahagi ng iyong research. Okay? Siyempre, Importante na they will not be placed in the risk of criminal and civil liability or walang damage sa kanilang financial standing, employability at reputation. Kailangan pagka ganito okay na hindi ka humingi or kumuha ng informed consent. Kasama rin dito pagka kasama rin sa hindi na require ng informed consent ay kung yung pag-aaral mo or kung pinag-aaralan mo yung factors related to job or organizational effectiveness conducted in organizational setting for which there is no risk to participants, employability and confidentiality is protected. Halimbawa, gusto mong obserbahan yung production line sa isang manufacturing company. Hindi na required na isa-isahin mo yung mga tao na nasa production line and invite them and ask for their informed consent in participating or in your observation ng kanilang ginagawa. As long as you will secure confidentiality and walang risk sa employability ng participants. Lastly, kung permitted by the law or federal or institutional regulations. So kung halimbawa yung institution ang nag-provide na sa iyo ng permission to conduct research at nakasulat doon hindi na kailangan manghingi ng informed consent sa participants, kung explicitly nakalagay doon hindi mo na kailangan manghingi ng consent from the participants. Okay, now with regards to offering inducement for research participation, psychologists should make reasonable effort to avoid offering excessive or inappropriate financial or other inducement for research participation when such inducement are likely to coerce participants to join. Personally, I believe that there are instances where hindi mo na kailangan bigyan ng incentive yung tao for joining your research. There are cases where providing incentives or rewards to people to join your research can sometimes influence their intrinsic motivation. Malay mo, gusto talaga nilang sumasali sa research. Now, if you provide them with rewards for doing something that they already enjoy doing, ang nangyayari ay nagkakaroon ng over-justification effect in which yung intrinsic motivation ng tao ay posibleng maapektuhan dahil gusto naman na talaga niyang gawin yung isang bagay. And when you provide monetary gain or monetary benefit dun sa tao para gawin yung isang bagay na yon, posibleng ma-relate niya yung enjoyment niyang nararamdaman doon sa perang binibigay mo at hindi na siya talaga mag-enjoy sa ginagawa niya. So, because of this, I believe that there are instances where inducements or inducements, whether in financial or other material means, are no longer important. Also, when offering professional services as an inducement for research participation, psychologists clarify the nature of the services as well as the risk, the obligations, and limitation. Halimbawa, parang ex-deal or yung nauuso sa internet ngayon na barter, kailangan alam nung participant kung anong makukuha niyang service mula doon sa psychologist pag sumali siya doon sa research. Kailangan klaro kung ano yung scope, ilang sessions, kung sessions ang pinag-uusapan natin, ano yung risk, ano yung obligations nila, at ano yung limitations nila. Halimbawa, sinabi mo, libre yung counseling services, pero good lang yan for the current academic year or for the current year. Pagka 2021 na hindi na good yung offer na yon. Kailangan alam nila yung parameters ng offer mo. Okay, now with regards to deception in research, psychologists do not conduct a study involving deception unless they have determined that the use of deception or the use of deceptive techniques is justified by the study's significant prospective scientific, educational, or applied value, and that the effective non-deceptive alternative procedures are not feasible. Ano pwede example nito? Halimbawa, gusto mong matuklasan ang epekto ng placebo. Okay? Mahirap ma-attain yung ganong research, yung ganong research aim kung hindi ka gagamit ng deception. It's not like you can tell people na gusto kong subukan kung e-epekto yung paniniwala mo or magiging effective yung paniniwala mo na effective yung gamot sa paggamot ng sakit ng ulo mo. It won't work that way. However, yung paggamit ng deception ay dapat, number one, justified nung scientific, educational, or applied value nito at walang ibang paraan para makuha yung research aim mo na hindi gumagamit ng deception. Kailangan laging justified yung deception mo. Kailangan nag-isip ka na ng ibang means of getting information without using deception. Kailangan kinonsider mo na yung ilang non-deceptive alternatives at na-realize or naisip mo or napag-decidean mo na hindi feasible itong mga non-deceptive alternatives. Okay. Also, psychologists do not deceive prospective participants about research that is reasonably expected to cause physical pain or severe emotional distress. Pagka ang reason mo for receiving participant ay ayaw mo malaman nila na posible silang masaktan or baka experience ng severe emotional distress, hindi justified ang iyong deception. Okay? Importante na alam lagi ng participant kung makakaranas siya ng physical pain or ng severe emotional distress. Kailangan laging alam ng tao yung ganong bagay, yung risk nila for physical pain, for physical harm, at saka severe emotional distress. Lastly, psychologists explain any deception that is an integral feature of the design and conduct of an experiment to participants as early as feasible, preferably at the conclusion of their participation, but no later than the conclusion of the data collection, and permit participants to withdraw their data. Ano ibig netong sabihin? Kahit na gumamit ka ng deception ay sabihin mo pa rin sa participants mo no later than the end of data collection, but preferably as early as the end of as early as the conclusion nung session na gumamit ka ng deception. Bakit ka gumamit ng deception? At bigyan sila ng opportunity to withdraw their data kasi hindi ka naman talaga nakakuha ng informed consent nila, ng full informed consent nila dahil ikaw ay gumamit ng deception. So in cases where you use deception, you will have to allow them to withdraw their data kahit na nag-gather mo na yung data nila. Kahit na sabihin mong na-record mo na, kahit na sabihin mo nang natapos na yung buong experiment, pag nag-decide sila or nag-express sila na ayaw nilang isali mo yung data nila, ay wala kang magagawa but to remove their data from your experiment. Okay. Lastly, importante na lagi kang nagde-debrief. Ano ibig sabihin nito? You will have to provide a prompt opportunity for participants to obtain appropriate information about the nature, results, and conclusions of your research. And they take reasonable steps to correct any misconceptions that the participants may have, of which psychologists are aware. Misconceptions that the participants may have, of which the psychologists are aware. Kailangan at the end of your data gathering, at the end of your session with your participant, siguraduhin mo na alam nila yung nature ng research mo, yung resulta ng research mo at nung conclusions mo. Okay, madalas na practice ng napakaraming researchers ay pagkatapos mag-gather ng data, hindi na ulit binabalikan ang kanilang participants. Now, this is very unethical. Meron kang responsibility sa participants mo na balikan sila at ikwento sa kanila yung conclusions at yung results ng research mo. Mahalaga na kung nag-create ka ng misconception, halimbawa gumamit ka ng deception, at nagresulta ito sa misconception ng participants tungkol sa ginagawa mo or sa field ng psychology, ay kailangan mo itong isaayos, kailangan mong klaruhin. Kailangan or mahalaga na klaro dun sa participant ano yung ginawa nila, yung nature ng research mo, yung resulta ng research mo, at yung conclusion. There are even cases where participants will ask for copies of your research at kailangan mong i-provide yon. This could be done you could provide electronic copies, or if you want hard copies of your research. If scientific or humane values justify the delay or withholding this information, psychologists take reasonable measure to reduce the risk of harm. Also, when psychologists become aware that research procedures have harmed the participants, they take reasonable steps to minimize the harm. Responsibility noong researcher, noong experimenter, yung harm na ma-i-induce dun sa participant just in case may harm na ma-induce. So, responsibilidad ng researcher na isaayos or i-minimize yung harm na na-experience ng participant. So, this ends yung first part ng ethics in research and publication. Now we are going to talk about yung ethics naman in publication. Again, this is still based on the ethical principles of psychologists and code of ethics and code of conduct, section 8, research and publication ng APA. So, dito naman ang concern ay yung pag-report at publish ng paper. So, we do not fabricate data. We have to be clear with this. Psychologists, students of psychology should not or do not fabricate data. Okay, let me tell you a story. Noong 1957, may isang psychologist na nagngangalang James Vickery. And he claimed na yung pag-introduce niya ng subliminal message ay nagkaroon ng advertisement effect sa sales ng Coke at saka sa sales ng popcorn sa isang movie house. Ang problema ay noong inimbestigahan na yung bago imbestigahan naging popular yung research na yun, and up until now a lot of people believe in the power of subliminal messages. However, when other scientists cross-validated or tried to validate yung research na ginawa ni Vickery, they could not duplicate yung results ng research niya. Now, this raised suspicion sa scientific community. What happened is that they investigated yung original research na ginawa ni James Vickery, at it was found out na hindi niya talaga ginawa yung research na yon. In short, James Vickery fabricated his data. So anong nangyari? Kailangan niyang i-retract yung paper niya mula doon sa publication, and naging notorious yung pangalan niya in connection to fabrication of data. That's how important publishing validated and correct data is in our field. So, if psychologists, if just in case you will discover a significant error in your published work, you have the responsibility to correct your errors to retract your paper or to release an erratum or make any other appropriate publication means. So responsibilidad mo kung sakaling makita mo na merong error sa iyong research na itama yung error na to. This could be a correction, this could be a retraction, or an erratum, or in the form of an erratum. So, importante na i-correct mo ang sarili mo kung makakakita ka ng error sa iyong publication. Next ay plagiarism. Psychologists and psychology students do not present portions of another's work or data as their own, even if the other work or data source is cited occasionally. Hindi mo pwedeng i-present yung research ng ibang tao in part or in whole bilang iyong research. Kailangan properly cited, kailangan mong i-report kung yung research mo is a replication of another person's research. Responsibilidad mo na alamin kung yung research mo ay replication ng iba pang research, at responsibilidad mo na i-declare kung ito ay replication or ito ay hango sa isang research, sa research na ginawa ng ibang tao. So malaki ang importance ng pag-iwas sa plagiarism, not only in the scientific community but also in our school. Kung titignan mo yung student handbook, kasama dyan or merong section dyan on plagiarism. Meron ding nakalagay na appropriate consequences. Meron ding nakalagay kung anong pwedeng mangyari sa'yo pag ikaw ay nag-plagiarize. Okay, next, psychologists take responsibility and credit, including authorship credit, only for works they have actually performed or to which they have substantially contributed. We have to understand that principal authorship and other publication credits accurately reflect the relative scientific or professional contributions of the individuals involved, regardless of their relative status. Kahit na students or faculty member, kailangan yung principal authorship and other publication credit will reflect kung gaano kalaki yung contribution niya doon sa research na na-publish. We have to understand that the mere possession of an institutional position does not justify yung authorship credit kahit na siya ay halimbawa department chair noong kung saan yung research ay ginawa. Hindi ito nagja-justify ng research or ng authorship credit. Minor contributions to the research or to the writing for publication are acknowledged appropriately, such as in footnotes or an introductory statement. Except under exceptional circumstances, a student is listed as a principal author or any multiple authored article that is substantially based on the student's work. Faculty advisors discuss publication credit with the students as early as feasible and throughout the research and publication process as appropriate. Merong practice, this is a practice in our school, that when a student's work, a student's thesis, or a student's research is selected for publication or presentation in conferences and research fora, it's important that you include your advisor as a co-author, hindi principal author, but rather a co-author. Pero this should be clear at the start of the research process. Kailangan, bago pa ma-publish yung work na yun, bago pa magkaroon ng idea na publishable itong trabaho na to, alam na nung estudyante na yung professor niya or yung kanyang research advisor ay posibleng maging co-author niya pagka pinasa niya yung trabaho niya for publication or for presentation in research forum. Okay, the question is, can you publish your own, can you submit your work to another research journal after it has been published in another research journal? Ang sagot dyan ay you cannot do this. While you can submit your research for presentation in a number of forum, kahit na paulit-ulit mo i-present tong research na to, okay lang, walang nagbabawal niyan. Ang bawal lang ay publication ng research. Okay, so, how about yung pag-share ng research data for verification? After your results have been published, you are required not to withhold your data on which your conclusions are based from other competent professionals who seek to verify the substantive claim through reanalysis and who intend to use such data only for that purpose, provided that the confidentiality of the participants can be protected and unless legal rights concerning propriety data preclude their release. This does not preclude psychologists from requiring that such individuals or groups be responsible for costs associated with provisions of such information. Also, psychologists who request data from other psychologists to verify the substantive claims through reanalysis may use shared data only for the declared purpose. Hindi to pwedeng gamitin for other purposes. Kailangan lang gamitin siya for verification of the claim. Hindi pwedeng gumawa ng panibagong research dito. Kailangan lang for pag dineclare mo na nanghihingi ka ng kopya ng data for verification ng claim, yun lang ang pwede mong gawin. Hindi ka pwedeng sumulat ng panibagong papel wala doon sa data ng taong yon without the person's consent. So, requesting psychologists obtain prior written agreement for all the use of all data. Kailangan merong written agreement. Kailangan nag-consent yung original researcher doon sa requesting researcher at merong kasulatan nito. Okay, so this ends our lesson on the ethics in psychological research and publication. We have talked about the definition of research ethics. We have talked about the principles of a moral life. We have talked about the applications of these principles in the conduct of research and publication. We've talked about specific ethical procedures ethical procedures students and other researchers will have to make in order to make their research ethical. So, well, after watching this video, you will have an activity related to ethics in psychological research and publication. Goodbye.